weren't recording. That was brilliant stuff.
No, it wasn't.
Hello. Is New Zealand pie folk rock band? That's judgy.
Oh. Okay. Hi,
I
everyone.
don't think they do pie.
How are you?
We're fine.
We're fine.
Like,
So
super fine.
now is the time of year that I like to refer to as the pit of despair.
I mean, it's a pit of despair. No one ever comes out. Except we will.
Okay. So one thing you can do to get out of the pit of despair is to watch The Princess Bride. The other thing that you can do.
I've got to go down into the
Smith
basement.
is just like throwing things around. Okay, the other things. So there are lots of things that you can do to get out of the pit of despair, but this is kind of normal, not only in an academic semester, but also like seasonality and all sorts of things, right? So your pit of despair, the reason why you are in it is different than why someone else is in it. So it's really hard to say, okay, do these things, right? But recognize that we're all in this kind of pit of despair.
Oh, that was good. I was in the
Smith, Smith just got out. Yeah, things feel really shitty. And you will be okay. You will get through this. A lot of what's happening now feels like it's, permanent and forever and like huge consequences for your life. And what I would welcome you to do is to try to, bring down those feelings. Just get your body through it, get your brain through it. Everything will be okay. No matter what, right? Like, there are plans, there are things, there's no, even like, if you're like, oh my goodness, I'm never going to graduate. You totally will. And maybe it'll take you an extra semester or an extra year. But like, who cares? Those things are fine. It will be okay. You killed my father. Prepare to die. Wonderful that you've seen this movie. But just readjust some of the expectations that you are putting on yourself. Because I promise you, the world's expectations are much, much lower. Okay?
Like they're down there.
I got to be a prof. Me! Of all people! So, if I can do it, like anyone can. Okay? Good.
I'm busy.
I'm busy. Okay. So we're going to wrap up ecology today.
Before we do that,
what?
I want to know if this is the first time that you're Gen X professors or if you've got even boomers that are still teaching you.
I'm an elder millennial.
You are fine. If you'd like to.
But anyway, yeah.
Okay, so I'm Gen X, certainly.
Yeah.
But is this the first reference to Princess Bride you've had this term?
Oh, no.
Because I'm guessing not. It might not even, for all I know, it might not be the first time we've referenced it. Because they might just like leak out of us.
Yeah. You could want anybody want a peanut? I used to have that T-shirt.
Stop it right now! I mean it.
Anybody want a peanut? Okay. Wonderful. Yes. Okay. So, quite seriously, if you have not watched it,
do so.
Do so. This will be all you need for just a temporary mental health dip. Obviously not the serious ones, but like. Yeah, and we should like get a huge screen and play it on Johnson Green.
It's on Disney Plus right now.
Okay, good.
So find someone who has Disney Plus.
Get together
and invite yourself into their screens.
Good.
And
watch
give it a
this
watch.
movie. Okay.
It was recently an anniversary of it, and if you
35 years.
Mandy Patinkin, who is the actor who you might know from other things like Homeland and Mandy Patinkin and like Broadway,
and like Lovely Human,
Human, he's on Twitter because of his son. His son put him on Twitter. He and his wife, his partner, on Twitter during the pandemic, and they're lovely people, and you can go and watch them. Like, be lovely together, and it's. C'est gonflé. It inflates my soul.
Okay.
They're also on TikTok. Nice. Physics prof has referenced it once per year. Physics prof has referenced it. I'm going to say yes.
There's that ROUS on the top here.
Rodents of unusual size?
Amazing.
I don't think they exist.
Sorry. We've watched this movie a little bit. Okay. Shall we?
You mean you'll put down your rock and I'll put down my sword and we'll try and kill each other like reasonable people?
The way God intended. So, homework question, shall we? Do you want to? Maybe not, but it'll just give us more opportunities to tell you some more lines.
That was performative checking in. You wanna? It doesn't matter. We're gonna.
We're gonna. Hold on one second. Food webs. I think it's this question. Yes. Lunch. So, either you've done your homework or you haven't. And again, don't panic. This isn't meant to like call you out.
And it doesn't matter if you've done it now, because you can do it like when you're prepping for the topic test,
which is tomorrow. So, yeah, tomorrow.
Which could be tomorrow. It also could be.
It also could be Friday.
Yeah,
that's right. Check the announcements in the announcements section, because I don't want to say something that is not written there. That course
we've written it well there.
Yeah, because
we do know, we can say with 100% certainty, tomorrow is Thursday.
That is not a line from Princess Bride. It's mostly Thursday.
I'm busy. I'm going to guess your physics prof was born between 1967 and 1978.
Oh, good. There's some folks clicking in.
Yep, they're rocking it.
Are they?
Yep. With the clicking and the clacking and the ticking and the talking.
Really? That's the answer? Yep. It is the answer. You're doing well.
Thank you. I'm trying. What do you mean, damn? We're all doing well together.
Here's the question. Sorry. It's so slow. It's been a long week. It's only Wednesday.
Doug thinks we're boring. He was young?
Yeah. Is that our children?
No, I think it was old.
Old.
I've had to verify like 9 times already today.
Yeah, okay.
It's like, I'm me!
I'm me. So maybe 30 more seconds, if you're okay?
Are we up to... Oh, we're thinking.
We're thinking.
Yep. Would you like some breakfast?
Oh.
This is a breakfast cereal.
I think it's just all caramel.
You are... Dr. Jacobs is a high grader.
Oh, totally.
You need to know who you're living with. Like, I'm a random draw. If you notice, the random draw right now...
Is not random.
Is strictly caramel.
Yes.
This has been... If you had a beak, it would be not shaped for caramel.
It's like we get along. It's
if I had a beak, it would be just... multi the next. You have a specialist beak.
I'm a specialist. It goes in order. What?
Oh, I guess it's you. You just made me laugh, and so Deville. I had an old boss, a farmer type, who whenever I'd say thanks, I'm trying, he'd respond, "Yeah, you're trying, all right, trying my patience," which makes me laugh, and I think I'm gonna take it.
Okay, we're gonna call it quits on this poll if that's okay. Are you okay? Oh wait, Jasper needs to join us. There we go. Okay, end poll. Share results. Here we go. Boop. And then over. Wait. There. Cool. So most of you got it correct. Population abundance of both crab and shrimp will decrease, and that, of course, will increase the market price because humans eat crab and shrimp. So work through it otherwise. So the idea is to look at the other popular one was cod will eliminate zooplankton from the ecosystem. So certainly cod do eat zooplankton, at least the juveniles, but so do like a ton of other things. So here you would infer that the population of zooplankton would be damn high. And it's very unlikely that that would happen, right? Especially if you're just introducing larval cod. They're not going to be eating it for a whole ton of time. The juvenile cod also do eat it. But then once we get up into the adults, they're not eating it anymore. So it's just a short stage. And so way, way, way likely, though, that starfish, crab and shrimp, take a look, crab and shrimp, right? There's really only competition with humans for crab and shrimp. Some silverhake are eating the shrimp, but like juveniles here are eating them. The adult cod are eating them. The adult cod are eating the crabs. So this represents way, way, way more competition than it would for zooplankton. Okay.
And as you noticed, we talked about it in the last time we talked about food webs. Anyhow, we kind of drew attention to the fact that sometimes lines can mean different things depending on who's written. In this case, this was a food web that we pulled where people were telling the narrative of who's eating whom.
Yep.
And so the arrows go along with the action as opposed to the energy, which is flowing the other way.
Yep.
And you interpreted that. So
well done.
Well done, you.
Good. Super good. Okay. Awesome.
Learning outcomes.
Stuff. We're going to do stuff today.
And this is as Dr. Jacob said, this is the day that we're transitioning with the last bit of ecological story to the first bit of physiological story, to some of the context that we'll be talking, that you're kind of already in your prep for the next part of the onion.
Mm-hmm. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of like fold in together some of the evolution and the ecology stuff that we're doing.
I think it's there.
It's there. Your
see
cattle egret is there. Oh no, somebody killed it with an X. That's why. Okay.
I see.
So what we're going to do is we're going to fold in some of the evolution and the ecology, and we're going to do it talking about humans. And when we talk about humans, we have to acknowledge that we're talking about humans, and so there are all sorts of exceptions and different stories and different ways of interpreting the information, and I think that that's really important. We're also going to be talking about some First Peoples, some indigenous people, and indigenous groups, and of course, the end of the story is not good. So we're just kind of putting it out there that, we will tell you the end of the story, but it is not a happy ending. But we'll start with a really interesting story about, the way that humans have moved around the planet. And we'll get you to think about that context from the evolutionary genetic perspective as well as the ecological perspective. Okay, so that's what we're going to do today. We are recording, so if you do want to step away, because that's not just something that you're going to want to talk about today, that's totally fine. You can take a look at it another time. But I think it's really interesting, and I hope that that you're able to enjoy the interesting stuff as well as learn from it when we think about our own species and how all of this stuff relates. But here, okay, planet Earth, and again, no Antarctica. It's like my thing. There's a whole bunch of Kiwis. Like Kiwis are all about finding maps that don't include New Zealand.
Because it happens all the time.
It happens all the time. I'm about finding maps that don't include Antarctica. Okay, so here's a map that shows some stuff, and it basically shows a pattern. It's a hypothesis of human movements around the world over time. So some folks call it a migration. It's not technically a migration because a migration usually, involves returning.
Yeah,
and
displacement.
It's a seasonal thing, sort of migration, but they call this, the Great Human Migration or whatever. And there are some really interesting hypotheses about what drove this movement. And including, I'm sure you've heard, folks following food, especially when we talk about, going over the Bering Strait and into the Americas. We like to think that we followed big game, we were hunters raw and, went after big food. But there was a recent, not that recent, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, article, I think it was in National Geographic, that was talking about.
Recent to an elder millennial.
That was talking about another hypothesis, and that was the curiosity hypothesis.
Huh? What?
And that people were just like, oh, I wonder what's over there. And I love this hypothesis because it is deeply human. And it maybe helps explain why humans have this distribution pattern and not other species, or that kind of deal. So anyway, I love the curiosity hypothesis, and there's some evidence for it genetically that we have these like curiosity genes and things like this, which I think is cool. And they also tied it to sexual selection and a few other things, right? So the whole idea about like valuing the hero, right? And that the hero gets, all sorts of, communal accolades and things like this. Anyway, it was really cool. And if you're interested, totally check it out. But what we seem to have is this pattern of movement from East Africa into the rest of Africa, as well as then out. And there are right now, currently, no archaeological evidence to suggest which way people moved out. Okay, so did they go north here of the Red Sea? Did they go south? People looking at sea levels and boat technology and all sorts of things like this, land bridges, to see what it was. And again, I'm going to go with people probably went in all sorts of different directions. There's probably no one way, right? Anyway, similarly, for the colonization of North America, the original colonization of North America, there was a lot of boat action, I think, that was going on. And I think we've been able to, there's some archaeological sites that really support that idea that folks were coming from these islands, as well as over land bridges. But anyway, let's just kind of accept this as a hypothesis for the movements.
Let's call it the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, and think of those pants as jeans.
Oh, boy. Whew.
I've been looking for that.
You've been looking for that? Yeah.
Since last year.
The Sisterhood of the Traveling Jeans. Okay. So let's take a look at this. And what I would love to do is to make some predictions about this hypothesis. So if this hypothesis is true, where on the planet would you expect, so minus immigration and emigration, okay? Like, let's not even pretend that that's a thing yet. So if this hypothesis is true, where would you expect to see the greatest amount of genetic variation in indigenous peoples on the planet? Give me a stamp.
Stamp on the map.
Stamp on the map. Sweet. Okay. If this hypothesis is true, where would you anticipate to see the least amount of genetic variation in indigenous peoples?
A bifurcating prediction.
Super.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Okay. And what evolutionary mechanism are you applying to this prediction?
Throw it in the chat. What's the mechanism behind the prediction that you just made? We said that because a bunch of you just went, yeah, answered.
Good. Okay, yeah. Founder effect, which is part of genetic drift. Excellent.
Yeah. So
well done.
Pat yourself on the head.
Yeah. And so if we take a look at the genetic variation of indigenous peoples around the world, this pattern holds. It's really quite remarkable, right? So it's, these subtle differences, but there is more genetic variation happening in people in Africa than anywhere else in the world. And looking at sort of the extreme ends, it does hold. There is a reduction as a result of founder effect, right? So this helps support the hypothesis of this human distribution pattern and that it happened temporally, and that what we basically have is a serial founder effect, right? So it isn't that folks from Africa moved to South America, folks from Africa moved to North America, folks from Africa moved to Asia. It was like a sequence, right? Sequential of these splitting offs and further reduction of genetic variation, right? And all of this it's all just theoretical, right? Like that doesn't really have any consequences in terms of the species or anything like that. But it's just really cool. It's a genetic marker of our movements over tens of thousands of years. It's amazing.
But it's a cool thing because, of course, along with that, if we talk about these patterns and the influence of these patterns on us within the species, there's some other things that you could predict come along with that.
Yeah. Totally. And so some of you are like, yeah, this is really cool. So who cares? Yesterday, I had a meeting with my graduate student who's from Iqaluit, Cambridge Bay, where I was over the summer. And he is looking at exactly these things in arthropods, in invertebrates. So he did a collection of a whole bunch of insects from Iqaluit. And he's looking at where in the world is the next closest individual of those insects, trying to identify where invasive species are coming from. And the next thing that we're going to do is to take a look at the genetic variation of the population in Iqaluit to see if it is reduced compared to the variation that exists in the populations further south. And that would be evidence then of an invasion rather than a range expansion. That's awesome.
Isn't that cool?
So cool. Okay. I hope you like it. I like it, right? Did I get it right?
Yeah, I love
it.
Yep.
Yeah, because Smith is going to be the examiner on that defense, so I just want to make sure that it's...
So what other kind of things might come along with it? Well, those include things like that characterize us as a species.
Right.
Like
this
how
is
we talk.
Amazing. Okay.
What we talk.
So one of our traits, right, is our language. And it is one of the traits that sets us definitely far apart from other species. Now, other species do have communication and forms of language, but I think we can all argue that humans really, we got this. We're exceptional in our abilities to communicate. And we see the same pattern supported in our linguistic diversity around the world as well. So not only in terms of the number of languages, but also in terms of the complexity of the language itself. Languages that are coming from Africa, there are more of them. They are more complex. People speak more of them too. So there's more multilingual people in these sort of older places, these places that have been habitat to humans for a much longer time.
There's a clarification question in the chat. Is it based on colonizer or indigenous language? This is about indigenous
languages.
Yeah.
So airplanes really kind of mess things up a little bit, right? But we're gonna just kind of celebrate the original patterns.
But it's kind of, you could also look at the I think a flip of this would be, where in the world is it less likely that someone will just speak louder and slower when someone else doesn't understand them right away? And that distribution is somewhat different.
Yeah.
But there's other things this is a trait that characterizes us as a species that's intimately linked to other things that we've been able to do, like technology and technological things that have kind of bootstrapped our own evolutionary journey. But there are other species and you've asked in the chat about, well, does that make us an invasive species? And on several different timescales, yes,
Yes.
for
In
sure it
fact,
does.
I just read the introduction to my student, Brian from Iqaluit, who talks exactly about humans as an invasive species. Obviously, white Southern humans when he's talking about it, but there's an excellent argument to be made, of course, right? And one that has a pretty bad temper too, I think, in the history of human colonization, right?
Now, there's some questions about how do you quantify within language,
Oh yeah,
the diversity within language, and you can do it. There's a whole bunch of different ways to do it, just as you would functional diversity, like measurements of spines on the back of beetles, those kinds of things.
So you do it with phonemes.
Yeah.
And so you can break a language down and communications down into what are called bits. Okay. So each bit is basically a syllable that can communicate something. When combined with different bits creates meaning and message, right? So that's what I mean by human language being way more complex than other forms of communication. A whale, for example, also communicates in bits, but very few bits per minute compared to a human. A human can communicate thousands of bits per minute, whereas a whale is probably dealing at 1 or 2 bits per minute with its very long sounds. Right? And a bit is basically when you can vary either the frequency or the amplitude in a way that is meaningful. And we can do that, Lin-Manuel Miranda can do it very, very fast.
Oh my goodness, he is so quick.
If you ever seen Hamilton, apparently that is the maximum number of bits per minute, the fastest that has ever been done. It's just really quite amazing. But
also on Disney Plus.
Right. Within languages, though, you can calculate the sort of bits per minute. And what we see is that these, the African countries and the original indigenous languages have way more of these units that vary. And the extreme example of a reduced number of these phonemes is the Hawaiian language, where they have fewer sort of discrete bits, and in order to create meaning, they end up repeating them once or twice, right? Like Honolulu, right, is different than Honolulu. And so by just repeating them, you get more meaning. But that's an example of a relatively simple language with respect to the phonemes.
So these are traits that we've talked about so far that are to do the details about traits associated with us on this evolutionary journey, this great displacement. But of course, no single species on the planet exists as a single species on the planet. It interacts with, it preys upon, preys and is preyed upon by many others, but is also in many cases habitat for other species. And so one of the cool things about, once we think about the evolution of this displacement of humanity across the globe, it makes some predictions about what we would expect to see for taxa that use us as habitat. Things like facial mites that we all have. And so people have started to do that. And in fact, if you take 2700, maybe you'll be exposed to this, where we're going to test the DNA of your facial mites, because there are exactly what we said about linguistic diversity in terms of where the hotbed for diversity is globally, in terms of the intraspecific variability of the facial mite. It overlaps completely where the hotspot for global diversity for human linguistic diversity is. And you could make the same predictions because of that serial stepwise displacement through hundreds of generations, tens of thousands of years, about where the least diverse Demodex or facial mite populations might be. And it maps, which is kind of amazing. It suggests that anyhow, don't get me started on facial mites.
Can I just go back to language for 1 second?
Yes.
Because you might be like, oh, that's really cool. But so like, how does that apply? One thing that you can do for your long-term health, like your long-term brain health, is learn another language. Yep. And if you're at all interested in why, there's a great book, The World Until Yesterday, a whole section on the multilingual brain. and the way that it kind of forms patterns and connections. From babies who have never spoken but grown up in a multilingual home, all the way up to adults who are experiencing the onset of Alzheimer's, and the way that a multilingual brain can actually help to protect some of the symptoms of Alzheimer's. It doesn't prevent it, but it definitely helps reduce the symptoms, or prolong the onset. So you can actually do things for your brain based on some of these, evolutionary legacies, that can be really helpful.
Yeah, and as many of you know intimately already, learning extra plus maternal plus one, maternal plus two. I mean, there are languages that are more similar to others, but really getting your brain to think in parallel that's the power, and it means that 3 to 4 is not the jump that 1 to 2 was. So
That's right.
So do it for a bunch.
Yep, exactly. Cool. So now we're going to go to a map that has Antarctica, because I want to tell you about the southern tip of South America, and just a little shout out to Antarctica. So this is where we predicted there would be the least amount of genetic variation, right? And the pattern does generally hold. But I want to talk about those people, because they're a beautiful and important part of human history, that does end in tragedy. So that's just the little kind of warning that's coming up. But for now, let's celebrate the natural history of this area. So this whole area here is called Patagonia. Here we have the Andes that then kind of dive under the sea and emerge in South Georgia, which is freaky and beautiful, and then kind of spin around and then come back to Antarctica. So the peninsula of Antarctica is an extension of the Andes. And what's going on here is the Scotia Shelf is pushing. There's a shelf, like a continent, like an ocean shelf, that's dragging the Andes. And so you can see where the extent of the shelf is, and it's just going to keep on going for millennia and millennia, kind of pushing away these islands that are here. So right in this area is Tierra del Fuego. So that means the land of fire. And it's called the Land of Fire because Magellan and a few other explorers from Europe sailed in through here and sailed into this area and up in here. And when they were sailing, they saw these huge bonfires that were along the coast. And I hope it freaked them out. But what the bonfires were people and, communities that were using bonfires in order to keep warm. And they were noticed at night by the European explorers, colonizers. So this is called Tierra del Fuego, this island right here. Some of it is in Argentina, some of it is in Chile, and that is a whole other story of colonial fighting that we can talk about another time.
Would you be able to go investigate the Chilean part of that?
Me?
Yeah.
No.
There's a story.
I got arrested in Chile. Okay, so anywho, here's the Argentine side, and this is called the Beagle Strait. This is named after the Darwin's beagle, and here is a little town called Ushuaia. And funny story, I was once sailing in the Arctic on a ship called the Ushuaia. And all of the people that we would encounter in the Arctic would be like, "Hey, what's the name of your ship?" And we'd say Ushuaia, and then they'd start laughing, and they'd say, "No, really, what's the name of your ship?" And then we'd say Ushuaia, and then they would continue laughing until we finally realized that Ushuaia means big penis in some Arctic languages, which I think is awesome. Okay.
All right, everybody, back on the big penis.
we're having a day. Okay, so anyway, here's Ushuaia, and the reason why I'm taking you there is because I used to live here, and it's beautiful, I used to own property too that was like right here as well, so my house was in one of these little valleys. Let's zoom in a little bit more. Okay, so here's Ushuaia. And my house was, I think, up in this valley here. right here. I was doing the whole, like in one of these valleys type thing. I was doing the whole off the grid cabin in the woods kind of stuff, right? And it was an incredible place. And this is what it looks like. And it kind of has like a young kind of like Whistler vibe to it, because there's all sorts of skiing there and all sorts of outdoors, winter sports and things like this. And then there are ships that are sailing to Antarctica. And in fact, right here is the ship Ushuaia, right there. Okay.
You've seen it if you've seen The Revenant in some cases, because when they were filming that movie, the filming originally was taking place in Alberta, in and around the Rocky Mountains, and then all the snow melted, and so they displaced all of the filming so that to near this part of the world and to near Ushuaia. And so if you're watching that film and Leonardo DiCaprio's Very, Very Bad Day, which is the subtitle or the secondary title, as he's fighting that bear, some of that's down here.
Yeah, we're not going to get to the physiology stuff.
Oh, yeah. But before the end of the course, we will.
Yeah, but whatever. Okay, so, cool. Are we good? We're situated in the world. Now, let's tell you about the indigenous peoples that used to live here, because it's really awesome. So, right along the coastline, right, is super mountainy. So we showed you, this is what it looks like, the coastline. It's stunning. And right along the coastline, the people that lived there were called the Jamana. Okay. And if you're going to be looking for it online, it starts with a Y, Yamana. So Jamana is the pronunciation in Argentina because the Y is a J sound. So the Jamana lived right along the coastline, and those were the bonfires that Magellan and the other colonizers were seeing, because the Jamana lived right along the coastline and were functionally, sort of ecologically, deeply intertwined with the marine environment. So they were kind of more marine mammal than they were terrestrial mammal, right? And for that purpose, because they were always in the water, they didn't wear clothing. Clothing really kind of bogs you down, and it's always wet, and it can get, full of bacteria and all sorts of things. And so the Jamana spent, time on land mostly without clothing, which is why the bonfires were there in order to be able to keep them warm. Another interesting thing is that because they were, feeding mostly on sea lion as well as mussels and whales when they beached, their bodies had like lots and lots of fat, and people don't know whether, or archaeologists don't know whether the Jamana intentionally put fat on their skin in order to make them more waterproof, or whether it was just a, sort of a side condition of processing lots of fat from the fur seals and the sea lions that they were eating. But Jamana skin did have this very thick layer of oil on it, which was probably beneficial for increasing waterproofness. Lots and lots of really interesting information and history about the Jamana. Just on the other side of the mountains, just to the north, where these flat plains are, was a group of folks, a group of people called the Shelknam. Now, they were genetically, remember, this is the area where genetically they are going to be really similar to each other, right? The Jamana and the Shelknam, like cousins, right? In terms of, the movement of the different genetic pools and all of these things. Virtually the same, but very different in terms of phenotype. So the Shelknam, and the Jamana called them Las Onas, which means the others, right? And this is kind of a common dynamic from different groups or different tribes of people. But the Shelknam were very, very tall, very thin, whereas the Jamana were sort of shorter and more sort of squat, right? Very tall, very thin, wore clothing because they did have access to the only large huntable mammal that existed in Patagonia, which is the guanaco, which looks a lot like a llama. And they're still there. They're all over the place. They're fantastic. But the Shelknam really specialized on a terrestrial environment, on hunting the Wanako. So they had long bows, they had clothing, they ate meat, red meat from the Wanako, and their whole lives were kind of centered around this terrestrial relationship. So genetically, pretty much identical. Phenotypically, very, very different depending upon their habitat, right? And their, their context, which I think is just amazing. Anyway, these two groups. Cristino Calderon was the last of the Jamana. When I started teaching about the Jamana and the Sheltnam, Christina was alive. This is the second time that we're teaching it, and Cristina Calderon has passed. She was really important for the preservation of not only, her people, but also her people's language. She was the last person to speak the Jamana language as a first language indigenous person. And she wrote books and stories and made sure that all of these things were documented during her lifetime. She actually died in Puerto Williams, which is just across the Beagle Channel from Ushuaia, where she lived out her life. She was protected and celebrated and respected, and she was able to share a lot of her information just before she died. So here is the article about her passing. She was 93 when she passed away, and she's holding here one of her books that she has shared. Now, she has children, so they are also Jamana, but she is considered to be the last because of her knowledge, because of her language knowledge. Here she is, though, with her daughter and her granddaughter, and her daughter has taken on the role of sharing the information. This is one of the books that they wrote together. It's called I Want to Tell You a Story, and I think it's available on Amazon if you'd like to order it. But it's really a lovely book.
Links for all this. You will get all of these images are linked.
Yeah, you just click right here.
I put the links in the chat.
Yeah. The story of the Sheltnam is very, very different. Both of the peoples are no longer with us. One of them was a slower extinction, and the other was a much more faster extinction. Both of them intentional. But the Jamana, their story is about disease. And death as a result of the introduction of germs and disease from colonization. But the Sheltnam were intentionally killed when they were invited to a barbecue and poisoned, and that just killed thousands and thousands of Sheltnam, and they died. So this was a Spanish intentional genocide of the Sheltnam. All of this stuff is available, if you're interested in the information and the actual stories and the dates and the people responsible, it's all available to you. Also, if you're interested in reading about a sort of biological, cultural integration of the history of colonization, this book is a really good place to get started. Don't stop here, but get started, because it's an easier read, and it's well written, but don't stop. Just keep going, but start here. Guns, Germs, and Steel, using some of the things, the hypotheses that we've presented to you, and kind of fully flushing out, telling the story of colonization, and why Europe colonized South America and not the other way around, kind of deal. And it's a fascinating read.
There's another one that came out a few years ago that kind of picks up. This is, for us, this is a book that's not too old, but as we are old, it is in fact old. But there's a book that came out a few years ago called Sapiens, Brief History of Humankind. It's also an interesting and a good read about the process and the and the mechanisms and the consequences. And both of them, I put links in the chat to each of them. And you will have the links when you get the PDF.
Yes. Yeah. Good. Cool. Okay. And I think we're done for today. We are done with ecology, and we'll be moving on to physiology and all of that stuff. Again, trying to integrate some of these things. We hope that you enjoyed today's class, and hope that you can kind of see how all of these things apply to us. We haven't stopped evolving, and also how the ecology really does change the context of human evolution or the human relationship with the environment. I have nothing more to say. Do you?
Oh, well, I have more things to say, but I'd
Okay.
rather be the voice for those